Hello and welcome to Signed, Sealed, Now Deliver, why industry leaders must now deliver on their pledge. My name is Ellie Edwards-Scott. I am co-founder of the Advisory Collective, and I will hand over to introduce my illustrious panel, starting with Lauren.
Hello, I'm Lauren Ogúndèkó and I work at PhD Media, part of the Omnicom Media Group. I look after digital media and I'm from a pure play digital background with a background in computing.
Guy?
Hello, I'm Guy Sellers. I'm the CEO of Total Media. We're a media independent and we specialise in behavioural planning.
Afua?
Hi, my name is Afua Basoah. I'm Vice President at Rabin Martin, which is a mission-driven global health strategy firm focused really on providing counsel to clients across pharma, NGOs and foundations.
And Sat?
Hi there, I'm Sat. I am a commissioning editor for ITV. We are obviously the largest commercial broadcaster in the UK, and I'm responsible for their unscripted content there. And I'm also the chair of our internal BAME network called Embrace.
Fantastic. So let's kick off. So what I'd be really interested to get the panel's thoughts on the industry's reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement. What do you think of the industry reaction so far, but also the pledge that's been signed by so many industry leaders to address inequality and take action against racism? Guy, if you're okay to kick off with this one, thanks.
Sure. Okay, first of all, it wasn't a very difficult decision to sign up. It makes perfect sense. What it's done in the short term is create a huge amount of debate, and there's an awful lot of panels, and we're on one now talking about this issue, so that's a very good thing. And internally at our company, we've set up a diversity and equality council, and I just put out an email basically asking people to join. And got swamped. So, you know, it's got a huge internal interest, which we are, using to great effect.
Fantastic. Afua, you're nodding there, so I'd like to get your response.
Yeah, I felt really strongly actually about the response, whatever the response being, and I think there's been a lot in the way of organizations stepping up and stating that what they've seen and is an injustice. I think where my interest lies is beyond the words and beyond the signing, and I think there's this where I've heard in other panel discussions almost a three-step process of act, or actually awareness, action and accountability, and I really loved that frame when I heard it, and I think signing to state that you have the intent to do better is fantastic and important, but I feel strongly that that is purely just the first step, and where I'm really interested is in ensuring our organisation and others who have signed move beyond the signing and say, okay, so what do we need to do and how do we address the areas we can do better. And sometimes that might be that you can't do better on your own. And I think that these sorts of panels and the discussions that have come from signing have been super important.
You make some really interesting points. I mean, as you say, the signing is almost, you couldn't not, and that's kind of the starting point, and now we need to see the action. And on that point, Lauren, you were talking to me about initiatives that are happening within your agency. It'd be really good to hear about some more about that.
Yeah, so when the George Floyd protests happened and the subsequent follow-up to that, there was a lot of conversation, and there's been conversation about Black Lives Matter and just racial diversity for a really long time, but it really triggered a lot of steps that took place across Omnicom and across PhD as well. So we launched OMG Voices, which is a safe space for people to anonymously talk about their experiences, you know, if it means reporting issues that they faced, they should use it as well. And off the back of that, CEOs are going to be encouraged to discuss themes that come out of OMG Voices in town halls, so that the discussion can continuously be prevalent. We've also launched a few D&I subgroups as well. So D&I has always been on the agenda for Omnicom, but over the last few weeks, specifically, there's been about 8 different subdivisions set up. Racial diversity is heavily on the agenda, and there's a lot of information collation happening. So we do report on certain numbers internally, but we're looking at how to streamline that reporting so we can have appropriate numbers in place and put targets in place as well. The business massively believes in having targets, because if we don't have targets, we don't know what we're working towards. So that's happening. Over the next couple of weeks, the initiatives will start to roll out. I'm chairing one of the councils, you know, putting my money where my mouth is, and also trying to be an example as well. So that there hopefully will be some press coming out, but that's part and parcel of some of the things that we've done, and also encourage lots of open conversations. I think one of the biggest things that happened when we did the Juneteenth day, Afua will know because she's part of Omnicom, was that we all took some time out, and we all we had lots of resources shared on things to read. And some of the biggest takeaways that I've had personally shared with me is that it's the first time that people have felt that they can talk about things openly that's always been quite taboo and quite shunned. And the conversations that have happened have led to so many different, you know, experiences from people who didn't know about other cultures before. And you could say this should have happened a long time ago, but I think we should focus on the fact that it's happening now, and we're moving away from, you know, it not being open.
You've really covered a lot of pertinent areas that I want us to delve into, but before we do, I'd really like to hear from you, Sat, in terms of what ITV are doing around this. And actually, you know, I've been reading a little bit about the action, so it'd be good to hear some more.
I mean, firstly, going back to your initial question, I think what was so incredible about this moment, as opposed to any other moment, it felt like this is beyond just sort of, say, for example, you know, people of colour having to talk about race and the issues surrounding it. It felt like a real sort of grassroots movement that actually encompassed everyone. And it was everyone that sort of finally sort of looked up and said, hold on, there is a huge problem here that has not been tackled properly. And I think that in turn was brought into the workplace, and everybody felt the same way about it. And I think that in turn is obviously rightly so motivated all CEOs, companies, organizations to absolutely look at what are the issues specifically within their organizations, and also how they can influence and use their clout and power, you know, to influence society as well, which I think is just, you know, the most amazing thing, you know, from, you know, literally Yorkshire Tea to you know, media organizations to, you know, just absolutely everyone. So I think it feels like for the first time everybody is on the same page. Everybody feels like this is something that they can get involved with, and they all understand the same sort of message, which is, you know, I think has come out massively loud and clear, that everybody wants to learn more. Everybody now knows that it is it is about being actively anti-racist, and it's about sort of really changing the status quo and creating opportunities to level the playing field, you know what I mean, and to rewrite, is that the right phrase? To right some of the wrongs and the systems that have been in place, which I think as a start point is just the best place to be, because I think everybody's on the board. It doesn't feel like one person is doing it. And I think that is the key more than anything. to change something, it takes everyone, and it takes everyone to do, you know, just one thing in their lives and have a thought to want to change it, and it will happen. From ITV's perspective, I think we've had a lot of internal reflection about exactly what we need to do to actually change how we're going to be as an organisation going forward. And I think that is absolutely the right thing, because it is a bespoke scenario for every organisation, and you have to look within and go, right, where is our problems? What do we need to do? How do we change it? And I think going back to Lauren's point about, you know, being accountable and targets and where is, you know, measuring things to know where our problems are is exactly the first place we sort of started. I think what we're looking at, and as you know from our plan that's sort of come out, is immediately sort of like trying to place someone on our management board who will become our sort of group diversity and inclusion director. So that is a really powerful voice on our senior management board, reporting directly to Carolyn, which will be amazing, because that way diversity and inclusion is absolutely sewn into the fabric of every part of our strategy and decision making. We're looking at how we ourselves can create opportunities, because in my head, and I think quite a lot of people are now, you know, within an organisation are agreeing that, you know, it's not just about representation. Representation is no longer just enough. It is about creating opportunities to move people forward, to give chance for to increase the number of voices we have around the table, you know, and the diversity of the voices. And you know, I think we all recognise, and I mean, there's so many studies that come out that actually the more diverse and inclusive your organisation is, the more successful it is, especially in the creative industries. And, you know, in terms of advertising and, you know, being a public service broadcaster, you know, we have a duty, and our livelihoods depend on connecting with our audiences. And if our audiences, you know, if we ourselves, what we're putting out there, don't look like our audiences, we're sort of already, you know, fighting a losing battle to a certain extent. So I think, you know, what we're trying to do is set ourselves simple but realistic goals that will actually fundamentally deliver change. And I think for far too long, I think everything has been sort of generally not necessarily as transparent and accountable. And I think that is the key thing, because, you know, in 12 months' time, we will be able to fundamentally say, have we done something good or have we not? Where do we need to do more? What has worked, and how do we change again?
You've raised some really interesting points. I think in terms of the representation and targets, I mean, what can we do and how will we change it within the year? Because if you look, you know, the IPA has had these diversity targets and we're woefully behind where we should be for 2020. Those figures came out before the George Floyd incident, and the figures came out and it's kind of like, oh, well, we're behind, but we're woefully behind where we said we'd be for 2020. So how are we going to? We've got a huge chasm to almost to fill, and yes, we can measure this in a year and another year, etc. But how, you know, what can be done, and how can we help from that entry level? Because I think that's where it starts, and then, you know, also kind of getting up that ladder. Yeah. Afua, you're nodding vigorously here, so it'd be great to get your views.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point, and actually it's one of the reasons that we refreshed our D&I strategy to include equity, appreciating that everyone starts, you know, has a different starting point, and to be a truly inclusive organisation, you need to nod to that and put into place platforms to allow those that don't have a level playing field to have a level playing field. We recently established a partnership with an organisation called the Social Mobility Foundation, and essentially they are our partners in sourcing interns, for example, in the London office. And we specifically look for folks who come from a different social economic background to those that traditionally end up in management consultancy. And already we have a diverse pool of individuals coming through our doors. And so when you ask the question, you know, how do we make the change? It does mean looking again at the mechanisms you have in place for recruitment. It means looking in new places, establishing different partnerships, unusual partnerships, because you will not change figures by doing exactly what you did last year or the year before, however much you you tell the world that we want to do better. If you want to do better, do different, because you're only going to get a different result by doing something differently. And yes, it's disruptive, because it's not easy to make changes, and cultural changes take time. So as much as I think we have these annual targets, realistically, real change takes time. And I think as organizations, we also need to nod to the fact that as much as we want to say that our board looks like it should from a target standpoint, our entry level, it's not necessarily going to happen in 12 months if you're a huge organization, and be realistic with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Guy, talk to me about what you've been doing at Total Media, and to pick up that point about the entry level and looking at the pipeline, because I know that's something that as an agency you've looked at, and how are you addressing it?
Yeah, absolutely, thank you. Well, first of all, I'd say the IPA's targets of 15% and overall and 25% intake are not unreasonable, particularly with the London-weighted business. So the population is actually higher than that by percentage terms. So I don't think that's particularly difficult. We're actually 17 in London, so a bit above, but we've actually been looking at this for a while, and not sort of holding ourselves up as saints, but it has been something we've been very firm about, being a meritocracy as a company. So almost try and be blind to anyone at the outset, and then test beyond that. I think there is another factor, which is how much does the community, the BAME community, want to actually work in advertising? We sort of feel it's a great place to be, but it's quite a small business, and maybe parents particularly of these kids would rather them to be doctors, go into medicine, lawyers, and accountants. I think what Paul Bainsfair has done at the IPA to get it chartered and make it slightly more, if you like, respectable in that sense, maybe help. And having Mr. Vaz as the president is a great symbol. So, I mean, I think that could be good. In terms of getting out there, we talk at schools. That's a good way of getting into the community. And we do support the Westminster Youth Foundation, Young Westminster Foundation, and they look after disadvantaged kids at Westminster, and there are a lot of them. Bring them into the office, teach them stuff, help them with projects, and just give them an experience of what a media agency or what an office is like to work in. So that's helpful. But I think to Afua's point, it's creating new pipelines is the way forward, and the way we did it before hasn't produced the results we really want, and we're just going to review that.
Sam, I don't know if you agreed with thanks Guy, all of Guy's points. I could see you kind of
sorry, I will say one thing about the point of whether BAME people want to work in advertising. I think the thing is to see is to become in one way, and I think if an industry is very homogenous and you don't see yourself within that, it is very hard for you to be able to picture yourself working in that space. So it is actually more incumbent on us as our industries and organizations to actually make sure that the BAME community understand that this is an option for them in their career path. And I think that comes from having visibility of people that look like you when you're in the industry. And I think that is a really important point to stress. I think you look like someone like Karen Blackett. She's the head of WPP in the UK. That for me feels like such a massive sign of actually this is a career for young black women. As soon as they see that, they see that could be me. And I think it's so important that we make a distinction between whether people want to do something versus whether we are allowing them to be part of our world. Going on to your sort of talking about pipelines, and I think you're right, pipelines are so incredibly important, but I think we have to also look within our organization and within the ranks and go, where can we accelerate diversity up the ladders as well, because I think, you know, our plan, you know, D&I has always been, you know, part of pretty much every single organisation, including ours. But what we realise is that we have to accelerate this process, and that's what our focus is on, accelerating it all. It's really properly understanding your organisation at every level and where things will make a difference. And I think it's quite easy to get sort of drawn into percentages. Okay, that, you know, for example, our you know, one organisation is 15% BAME, but where does that concentration happen? If it's all at low levels, you're 15%. You don't have a truly inclusive culture from top to bottom. What you have is a lot of entry points, and I'm guessing, and this is very outdated, that actually if they don't see themselves again going up the ladder, you will not be able people to stay in the industry and move up. So what is actually happening is it's sort of a bit sort of like waves hitting a rock, in the sense they come in loads hard and then they just go away. So what we actually have to do is create a system within your company, and also that inclusive culture that allows people to move. And we also have to think, you know, dynamically about it. It doesn't have to be, paths do not have to be linear up an organization, left, right, you know, whatever. You know, it doesn't have to be in the same sort of way. And I think that's, you know, is really important.
I think, yeah, you've raised a lot of points, and Lauren, I'd like to bring you in here, because I know, you know, we've spoken as well, and I've worked within agency groups, and I've been that only person in the room many a time. And I think, in terms of what you're saying, Sat, I think at entry level, yes, there is still a lot of work to be done. But it's when you kind of get to that mid to senior level that there tends to be a real drop off. And, you know, Karen is cited as a champion for all of us. I mean, she's a friend, yeah, she's a good friend of mine. But we need more. We need more, Karen. But, you know, there has to be more people. So how do we do that, Lauren? How do we, within an agency, how do we accelerate?
Can I just add one more point on Karen? And the great thing about someone like Karen, it not only inspires, you know, the Black community that they can actually achieve this, it also inspires, you know, other communities that have been sort of are slightly othered in a way. You know, to see a Black woman up there inspires people who have Asian background, because they also feel like, well, actually, that is possible. Disability as well, because, you know, they all suffer from, you know, whilst their individual stories are different, the barriers to entry and the barriers to success still sort of are very, very similar.
Yes, definitely. Lauren, do you want to
Sat's made so many good points. He reminded me that many years ago I Googled Black women in advertising, and Karen came up, and I was, oh my God, the one that actually exists. And that gave me a bit of hope, because I was going to be an engineer, and I decided to sort of swerve that. And I discovered marketing accidentally. And I was really curious to see if there was any other Black person in the industry. So that's why I Googled it. And I was like, oh, okay, well, there's one. On the point of having so many people enter the industry, we do, and there is a massive drop off. And talking to some young people in the past, some of the issues that have happened would be, you know, they didn't get on with their manager. There's been a lack of sort of personal growth for them. There is when you come from a different background, you're probably put there's I guess a goalpost given to you that isn't reflective of the same goalposts that other people get. And one thing that's really interesting that came out of some of my discussions is that when they Googled websites and looked at the leadership team, they were all white. So there was no real visible person that looked like them, to Sat's point, that they could actually aspire to. And I think it's quite shocking that Karen is still the only person that we are all looking up to in the industry, that how it's been 10 years, right? Why is she still the only one? There are brilliant Black and Indian, professionals in advertising that haven't gotten to where they need to get to, and they either leave the industry or go off and set their own agencies up, and that is an issue, right? What we are looking at PhD and Omnicom in totality is how we can get senior people to sponsor people that are quite close to those leadership positions. and be responsible for their careers as well. So you as a senior person, you'll be accountable for whether or not that person gets to the level that we are trying to get them to, and whether or not your progression individually is affected, like things like bonus is affected. I can't say that because I don't know if that's going to be the case, but I know that we are looking at sponsoring, and we're also looking at coaching. So Ellie, I've told you before that personally, executive coaching completely changed my life. And I statistically wasn't the sort of person that would be up for getting coaching. But, I have to thank one of my old bosses who put me forward, and it completely opened a whole new world for me. And that's one of the key skills that's missing for underrepresented people from underrepresented backgrounds to get into those leadership roles. It's, commercial skills, it's negotiation skills, it's managing upwards, it's having difficult conversations, it's being able to hold client relationships, and you get taught that. So why can we not open the pool and democratize coaching and have more people from ethnic backgrounds be part of that whole progression? There's lots of other things that we're doing, but I think those are the key things that I wanted to highlight.
That's really great, thanks. Yeah, I'll come to you, Guy, and then I want to circle back on a point that you made, Lauren, about the advertisers. But yeah, Guy, if you'd like to chime in, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks. At our sort of mid and senior level, so up to the board, and come back to that. In London, it's 35%, and I'm trying to think, why has it got to that level? Okay, we're a much smaller company than, say, PhD and so on. So the statistics percentages can be altered easier, but still, there's 100 people, and it could be to some extent, the more diverse you are, the more you attract a diverse workforce and retain it. We've actually managed to keep some of those senior boys and girls for 5-10 years, and they've grown with us. So once they're through the door and see the office, and maybe go onto the website to Sat's point, to actually see what we look like, it makes it easier.
Yeah, I think that and that point as well, looking at the website and looking at the board, I really want to address that in terms of advertisers and what role that brands play in this, because yes, we can do our bit from the media and advertising industry, but actually it's those brands themselves, isn't it? It's those brands, and they need to represent their consumers and effectively represent their consumers. I mean, do you have any conversations, Lauren, with advertisers, or have you had conversations since the George Floyd incident with advertisers about how they can be more reflective?
So there's been, it's come up a lot in pitches. There's a lot of brands that are starting to have diversity and inclusion as part of the pitch process. It was heavily part of Diageo's pitch process, which we recently won at PhD. And there are lots of clients taking stock of what they need to do individually in their businesses before I think they come to agencies to say, right, okay, well, you guys need to change. Those are the examples that I know of. And look, throwing the net out, if you look at the work that creative agencies do, so they select the images, right? They're the ones that do the filming. How can we start to change the narrative in that area as well to be more representative of the people that we are marketing to?
Definitely. I think, yeah, there's a whole, the dearth of diversity in the creative industry has been widely documented as well. Afua, I'd be interested in terms of the area that you specialise in with the healthcare element, and kind of what the advertisers or what the feeling is within that sector in particular.
Yeah, so the majority of the work we do and support our clients with is around addressing health inequities. So usually our clients come to us and say that they're keen, for example, to ensure that their product portfolio is accessible, not just in high income countries, but those countries where healthcare infrastructure isn't as strong, and affordability of some of their products might not be as attainable. And so social determinants of health means that on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, client-to-client basis, we're having to look at the factors that will contribute to poor health, and race is definitely one of those. We're doing some work specifically around that area. And so in the work that we do, just by the nature of the work which we do, which is addressing inequities, means that unlike maybe traditional fast consumer moving goods brands, it's a little different for us in that everything that we do is around addressing inequities, perhaps not so overtly specific to race, but more holistically, which means that race is part of the puzzle, but not specifically drawn out. There are a few examples of work that we are doing with clients that focus specifically on the race piece. But I think we're in, I wouldn't say in a different space, because all our clients are actively looking at how they can do better across the sphere of diversity and inclusion. But I think just by virtue of the work we do day to day, we are dealing with how to address inequities.
And how about, thank you. And how about from a broadcaster perspective, Sat, in terms of a broadcaster's responsibility in the area? I mean, we've obviously talked about what ITV are doing specifically within the organisation, but how about the responsibility that you have as a, creating shows and putting them out there to make sure that it is reflective?
Yeah, look, I think we are really aware that we're a public service broadcaster and we have to reflect our audiences. I think that our take on it is to make sure that we include diversity within all our sort of programs. So, you look at something like Britain's Got Talent, for example, it's, 12 million people watch it and love it every week, at its high. And, when someone like, say, for example, Ashley Banjo and Diversity win that competition, their story and their, it's completely, you can't separate from the fact that they're also from Black heritage, you know what I mean? And I think that to us is probably the best example of how you show an inclusive culture. When Lost Voice Man won as well with disability, and I think in that way that is making diversity mainstream, you know what I mean? So it's about reframing mainstream attitudes so it looks like the world we're in. We recently on Coronation Street, which is, it's so surprising that, after we finally got a Black family on Coronation Street, but in a way it was just another family moving into Coronation Street who were Black. And of course, we've been able to explore some incredible storylines, of racism and homophobia with them as well. But, it is about sort of representing everybody in a mainstream way. And I think, look, I don't think we are under any illusions that we don't have work to do on that area as well. Our on-screen talent, etc., etc. But it's an exciting and a good goal and task or challenge to set ourselves, you know what I mean, to how do we do this. And I think, like I said, we've sort of given ourselves a really sort of a look at like what is our channel going to look like in 12 months time, how many hours are going to have had new faces that aren't the usual suspects on there, and we will be able to actually assess it in a year's time. But it's so incredibly important, we're in a fight with, we want people to watch our channel. If they don't see, they don't watch, as well. So, it all comes back to the same sort of thing almost in a way.
Definitely. Is it a conversation that you've been having more recently, Guy, with your clients? And, are you finding advertisers coming to yourself and coming to the team and saying, how do we address this and what do we do in this area?
Well, a bit like Lauren's found, the pitch stage, even at the pre-pitch stage, you've actually got to demonstrate your diversity. And then at the pitch stage, I think they're looking at your team quite carefully. Are they reflecting what they want? So it's something I think they're conscious of, and we're conscious, they're conscious. So everyone's in the same sort of space. Specifically on, do you mean in terms of reaching audiences? Yeah. Okay, I mean, obviously we need to take that into account in plans and look at that. So obviously.
Just conscious of time, and I really want to touch on, you know, as we've said, this isn't a one-step process, and I really liked what you're saying, Afua, in terms of awareness, action, and accountability. So that kind of 3 steps. So we recognise that, you know, we are at that kind of action and awareness stage, which is fantastic, and it is going to take some time. So let's not say a year, but in 5 years' time, what do we think a truly inclusive but also anti-racist organisation will look like? What will our industry look like? Who wants to go for that one? Afua, shall I put? Sat.
I'm always happy to throw my hand up. So look, I think, you know, just going back to what you said about not in a year, in 5 years. Why not in a year? We should be looking at it in a year's time. And I think, you know, our plan of accelerating diversity is actually based on sort of like, where are we going to be in 12 months' time? Because we don't want to be in a situation in 5 years' time where we go, let's now have a look at it, and oh, lots of things haven't worked. And only this one thing has worked. We want to be able to go in 12 months' time, go, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what is showing, you know, showing promise, etc. So we can actually be fluid about it and be like, you know, fleet of foot, so we can change tact if we need to. So I think we should be thinking like, what is it looking like in 12 months? I think, you know, in 5 years' time, it would be really wonderful not to be having to have this conversation, is essentially what would be a mark of success. I mean, I remember, like, within the TV industry, we've been having this conversation. We had it 5 years ago and it was a big focus, and here we are again. So I think, you know, it would be good that, I think a mark of success is that we will not be having a panel like this to talk about it in a way.
That's a fantastic point. I mean, you're right. We have to take that action, and we have to measure ourselves. And, you know, 12 months' time shouldn't be too short a time to make considerable change. But I just want to see where we think we can get to as well. Afua, what are your thoughts on a year and then 5 years of where we should be?
Yeah, not that I challenge Sat at all. But I am a real believer in like sustainable change, and know how humans behave and appreciate cultural change. Like sustainable cultural change takes time, not the quick knee-jerk. Okay, let's get a few people in, but how do we ensure that our infrastructure is set up to allow for us, to your point, Sat, not to be having these conversations, although these ongoing conversations is a good sign also. I think in a year, it would be, in terms of success for our organization and our holding company organization, would be that some of the changes that we are stating we need are in play to happening. Because I truly believe a year, yes, 12 months, a lot can happen in 12 months, but the kind of change that I want to see are infrastructural changes, and infrastructural changes just take time. And I would want there to be incremental changes and goals that sit underneath that, because with infrastructural changes comes complacency. Because if you're not yet reaching that target, it becomes, you know, a hard slog. And so I think year on year, as we have that big target, is to ensure that there are some tangible, achievable, more bite-sized goals that we can hit. And that is, you know, have we got initiatives in place that address equity? I think Lauren mentioned coaching specifically. I see that sitting under equity. When you have a pool of people and you say that you want to ensure progress and you give everyone the same tools, that's not really inclusiveness. I mean, that's not really nodding to addressing inequity, because not everyone's going to use those tools in the same way or can. And so it's ensuring in 12 months' time, we have the mechanisms, the initiatives in place to start helping that uplift. In 5 years' time, I want to see diversity in terms of representation across all our levels. We have set some clear targets as an organisation, not just at entry level, but because we want to retain staff, we obviously have started at entry level, but we've looked across the board and we have understanding of what each level should look like moving forward. And in 5 years' time, my expectation is for better representation, but also for folks to feel that our space is the career home that allows them to bring their full self. Bring your jollof rice to work on a Friday if you want to, and no one questions what that is and why you need to. Do you know what I mean? There's total comfort in what we do, and still show up and show clients how fabulous we are. Whatever you look like, sound like, what your perspectives are, and how you think. That's for me success.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Guy, I'd like to pose the same question to you, if I may. So let's look at 1 year's time, 5 years' time. What does it look like? And, you know, specifically, you've talked about total media, and, you know, the fact that you have with your workforce currently, especially in London, got that, you know, a really good diversity balance. So where do you want to take it, and where do you see it going?
Well, again, in a year's time, I'd like to see the way we recruit entry level staff smoother in that direction. You know, and I'm not, you know, I don't know how we're going to do it quite yet, but you know, there's some work to go out and investigate on that. I think in 5 years' time, there's sort of like there's a commercial as well as a moral imperative to get this right. I mean, I think advertising should understand the people it talks to. We need to understand our audiences and how they behave. So we should look like them. So in 5 years' time, I would say that I'd like total media to look like the community it lives in, which is predominantly London, but also Manchester and Birmingham.
Great. And Lauren, putting that same question to you. So from a PhD, obviously you're speaking for a big holding group as well, but PhD and Omnicom view, where would you like your organisation to be, the organisation that you're working within, to look like in a year and 5 years' time?
So similar to what Afua said, I massively believe in structure as well, and that's what we're doing at the moment. We are building the foundations. And I think over the next 12 months, it will be an unbiased recruitment process. It will be that we've got programs in place to ensure that people are accelerating from junior straight through to senior management positions, and it's sustainable as well. So it's not just a one-trick pony. And I'd like to ensure that it's completely embedded in our organisations. I mean, it's not my personal responsibility, but it has to become the bedrock of how we operate. I think in 5 years' time, I want to get to a point where we're seeing more C-suite people that look like me, and are Indian, Chinese, Japanese, the whole shebang, you know, a nice cultural mix. And then one of the things that I've said to my CEO and Dan as well is that we should get to a place where you never need diversity and inclusion. It has to be ingrained into your organisation that you don't need to go out and find somebody to be the person to do D&I. That's what I would ultimately like to get to in 5 years' time.
I think that's a really good point, and really good way to kind of wrap this panel up, actually, because, you know, as you say, it shouldn't be, D&I shouldn't kind of sit in silo, or shouldn't, you know, it should be ingrained throughout the culture of an organisation, no matter the size of the organisation, shape of that organisation. And if we can address it, you know, bottom up, top down, and really get it in every stage in the organisation, then, you know, it will be truly inclusive place to work. I'd like to really thank you for all your time and your thoughts. Thank you, panel.